Welcome back to the Shacknews E3 live show. I am here with Steve Gaynor from Fulbright and Chris Charla from ID at Xbox, the Xbox indie program. We're here to talk about Tacoma, your upcoming game. Very exciting. I was a big fan of Gone Home. I saw Tacoma last year. I was very excited to play it. It's been more than a year.
Yeah, it's been one E3 ago.
It's been an entire E3, yeah. So what are you showing off here for Tacoma, and what do you want us to know first and foremost?
Yeah, well, the really cool thing was on the Microsoft stage on Sunday, we showed a new trailer, and we announced that it's going to be coming to PC and Xbox One on August 2nd. So just a little less
right around the corner.
I know, just a little less than 2 months out.
Pre-order now.
Yeah, it is
getting that hook in there now.
on Steam, GOG, Xbox One. And we get on yesterday. Yeah, God, it doesn't feel like yesterday because E3 feels like it takes 1 million years.
I remember a time before E3.
Right, vaguely.
Yeah.
Like their stories tell of a time before there was E3. But yeah, we did a hands-on demo for press and then for the public yesterday at the Microsoft ID at Xbox area over at Galen Center. So. It was really cool seeing a bunch of people, get to go hands-on with the game, see how they interact with it. But
I didn't get a chance to play it yesterday, but I know, as knowing the game as I do, there's a central mystery driving the narrative. And can you sort of encapsulate that for our watchers who might not know anything about it?
Yeah, sure. So Tacoma takes place on a space station, on Lunar Transfer Station Tacoma, and it takes place after the crew has been evacuated. And you've been called aboard as a contractor to retrieve the AI that runs the station and return it to its owners. And so since you're a contractor, it's kind of a need-to-know basis of like what you have to do, why the company has sent you here. But as you're exploring, the whole station is run by augmented reality, so there's been kind of tracking of the crew over their entire posting, and you're discovering these 3D recordings, kind of these echoes of moments that happened to them before you arrived. Since they're digital information, you can move through the timeline back and forth and kind of see what was happening in different sections of the station from every angle. And so you're reconstructing that story and solving that mystery, like you were saying, of what really happened, why were you called here, and what happened to the crew in the end.
As so often happens in sci-fi, something went terribly wrong.
So it's possible that nothing is as it seems. Who knows?
It's possible. And that's sort of what Fulbright, your company, is known for after Gone Home. There's an exploration focus to your storytelling.
For sure, yeah.
So explain how the exploration plays into the recordings you find and things like that.
Well, the thing that's really important to us is, we're a story-focused studio, right? Like, Gone Home is very much a narrative game, but we also, the co-founders of the studio, we come from working on the BioShock series together, and we're very, come from that design background of like immersive sims and these much more systemic, first-person games. And so what we want to do is meld that kind of focus on narrative and kind of, like a story that you can connect with, but through kind of the direct interaction with the world and you having the freedom as a player to explore. And so in Gone Home, that was like, you're in a house, you can go explore any, open up any door or cabinet or drawer in the house and find all these details of who these people were. On Tacoma, we wanted to go one step further and be able to kind of have you in the room with the characters while some of these moments were happening, but to still give you that kind of interactive access to all the details of those moments, not have it be, like about dialogue trees or influencing the course of events, but instead to have that kind of semi-presence where really you have access to these unguarded moments between these characters that they don't know they're being watched, that you kind of can understand them in a more full way. And so as a player, it was important to us that your role is not just to like, unlock these things and watch them, but that you're actually kind of manipulating the timeline and being involved with how you understand them,
right?
Instead of just being a passive observer.
You actually like scrub it like it's a video when you're looking for clues.
Right, and it's a video of these 3D moments that are moving all around you, and characters might, you're in one room and they go past you and leave, and you can follow them or follow a different character. And like you were saying, it's effectively you're exploring the timeline of these moments as they're happening and reconstructing them.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to kind of, in the design space, when we were working on stuff, to figure out how do we make you active in like exploring these things that happened? And so hopefully the augmented reality thing is like our answer to that.
It adds a puzzle element, but not one that I think is traditional to games. That when people would think a puzzle game, that's not what people would think of. It's like a narrative puzzle.
Right. I mean, I think that's how Gone Home was in a lot of ways too. It was not about solving hard puzzles to unlock the next room. It was like the story that you're finding all the pieces of and putting back together was practically the puzzle itself.
Yeah, and by having this recording system, I think that's very clever because you can be in the room when it happens, but also not.
Right.
So there's no weird dissonance of like, why isn't anyone reacting to me? I'm moving around and I'm doing something strange. No one is commenting on it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I mean, there's certainly something to be said for a game where what you do is influencing how the characters react. I mean, that's a huge part of like what the Walking Dead games are about and stuff like that.
But it makes you more of like a fly on the wall in this.
Right. I think there's an interesting alternate perspective to almost being like the ghost in the room, being the presence that is there without. There's the paradox of by observing something you change it, right?
Yeah,
and you can fully observe these moments without influencing them. I think there's a certain power to that.
And one thing that I think people really connected with Gone Home is there was the main narrative involving the protagonist and her sister, but by exploring the little nooks and crannies, you got little peeks of other bits of their life that weren't necessarily even relevant in a direct way to the main narrative. So how does that sort of manifest? I assume that something like that is present in this game too. How does that sort of manifest itself in like a space station?
Well, the interesting thing is, in Gone Home, it was a family's house and it's where they lived, right? But Tacoma, the space station, is where these people live and work every day. It's their whole environment, right? Of like their all 24 hours of their day are spent in this place, and so it ends up being about how they live as individuals, but also how they do their jobs in this very high-tech space and how they interact with each other. And what we really discovered, Carla, my story partner, and I, when we were trying to figure out like what is this thing really, was that we were building an ensemble story. Like in the past, when we worked on Minerva's Den for BioShock 2, or when we worked on Gone Home, it was really about one central character and their storyline, and then, like you said, there was sort of these other supporting elements that added up to that, or were kind of a branch off of that. But it had that single character focus. And in Tacoma, it's really about how all 6 of the crew members and the AI on the station, who's a character himself, were involved with the events that go on. And so I think that the experience of it is finding that central story, but then when you go through these people's personal spaces, or when you go through places where they did their jobs, you're also building up an understanding of each of them as individual characters, kind of getting a better idea of like why they're reacting the way they are in these crucial moments, or what their perspective is on somebody else's action by finding out more about them.
And one element in the scrubbing and the sort of replays of their lives is they can move through the space. You can follow someone into a space that they might have said something different to someone else or something like that.
Exactly, yeah.
As somebody who I saw that firsthand, and it makes a lot of sense seeing it. Can you like explain like an example? Obviously not a spoilery example, but like an example of how that feeds information to the player, like something that they might not know if they stayed in one spot versus going into another area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this kind of, I mean, we see this in film and television as well, where it's sort of like you see a character in a group and then the camera follows them and you see that they go into the next room and they contradict what they just said, and you have those kinds of moments of, I guess, dramatic irony in Tacoma, but they're part of this like web of information in each area that you're drawing from. So it's really about what perspective you have on each moment in the order it happens. So in Tacoma, you might be in the room where the conversation first happens and then not follow that character and know how what happens next to them influences that. Or you might have started by following that first character and then you follow them into the conversation and you have that context for like what their perspective really is or what that moment really means. And I think that that's what people really react to when they play Tacoma, is that feeling of like, well, I had this experience, this moment first, and then through my own player agency, I decided, well, I'm going to go see what was happening back here, add context to that, and now when you see this third part of the picture, you're adding all those things up together in a whole that really comes from how you chose to interact with all the stuff that's in the game.
It seems like they're coworkers. They're living in close quarters. They might clash. They might get frustrated with each other. But in following the different characters around, there was believable dialogue. There was never like one of them goes behind closed doors and then like twirls their mustache. And,
right. Yeah. I mean, good.
they have believable interactions in that they might have caused some of their own problems in some ways, but they're they're acting like human beings.
I mean, we hope so. With Gone Home, we had this. Our motivation was kind of to say, if you can tell a story interactively, like through the mechanics of exploring and finding things, giving people that deep access to who these characters are and what happened to them can make a mundane story about people that just live in a house and have normal lives be affecting because you have a connection to it. And I think similarly with Tacoma, we're telling a sci-fi story, but at the end of the day, the people that live in this very kind of like unfamiliar place to us are still people, and being able to have access to what makes them people that you could imagine going through these things as individuals or as people you can relate to, I think makes it more than just the plot you're discovering, and kind of gives you that feeling of, like you're saying, believability, because you don't only see them in the moments where they're doing something dramatic, that changes the course of events. You're also seeing what they're like, on their own time when it's just them, and how they're processing those things. And so hopefully that feeling of, I guess, humanity comes through in the end product.
So you mentioned you are telling a sci-fi story. I think in Gone Home you sort of played with genre conventions, and minor spoilers for Gone Home, I guess. It's a few years old. Everyone go play it. It's excellent. But it's structured like a horror game, but it's not really one,
Right.
And that's the way you play with that sort of leads to the catharsis of where it ends up going.
Sure.
Are you similarly playing with sci-fi in this one?
Well, something that's really interesting about that is, spoilers for the development of Gone Home. That wasn't a super intentional process for us. Like
it was a creepy old house in the fall.
Exactly.
And it was abandoned. So
right. Like in a lot of ways, it was more of a reaction from us to saying like, okay, well, you're in this huge old creaky house. There's a rainstorm outside. Somebody's missing. You can't help but assume like, okay, something is messed up here. Is somebody going to jump out at me or something? Like we tried to make it clear, like on the whatever download page, it's like there's no combat. You're not going to get attacked, but still, you can't help. You can't help but fill in those gaps. But
I thought you were lying. we are not that trolly.
I mean,
we would never troll you, Chris.
You joke, but like I think that's actually like what made the ending so effective, because when you get to the ending, your heart stops, thinking that like, oh my God, something bad, really bad happened.
Right. Sure.
And then there's like a moment of catharsis, like I said.
Sure.
So like having it structured like a horror game really like helped drive that home.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a similar situation where it's sort of like we build up all these associations, right? We're like, okay, abandoned space station, AI on board, something went wrong. Okay, we've seen 2001.
Yeah.
We kind of
there's an AI who talks in a soothing voice.
Right. And so I think that for us, we never come from a place of saying like, okay, and here's how we're gonna fake the player out, or like we're gonna like totally lean into this thing as a as a move to like have a twist. Like it wasn't.
You're not messing with people.
Yeah, it wasn't zombies all along or something. But the flip side of it is, I think, is kind of inescapable. You're like, okay, well, I'm in this place. I'm all by myself. Something's not right. What is it? And when you start out, all you have it to fill in those gaps is what we've seen in other media. I think that what I hope is that by the end you get to a place where you feel like it's not what you expected, but also that it's not just like a cheap trick, right? And that's a really hard line to walk. But I think that being aware of the assumptions people are going to start from and being able to actually respond to them is kind of part of the job when you are doing something that relies on some genre tropes that it's not the first time we've seen them.
Yeah, especially a story-driven game.
Yeah.
So Gone Home became sort of famous. Obviously, Minerva's Den was DLC for an action game. You had action elements. Gone Home was sort of famous for being the poster child for what people have derisively called walking simulators.
Sure, yeah.
It's a It's a term I hate, but it's silly. But whatever.
The problem is, what's the better word for it?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you're like a first-person adventure, and like what, Skyrim,
something,
right? Yeah,
something.
So we all know what we're talking about.
But there have been a lot of other games that have sort of followed that lead and become like very story-driven narrative adventures.
Sure,
yeah. Call it. So, what do you sort of think of the state of the industry with those types of games following, and what do you hope that Tacoma sort of put as your stake in the ground for the next thing from you? Right. What do you hope it accomplishes?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because I mean, we've seen so many really inspiring and really kind of varied indie titles that are in development. I mean, it was awesome seeing so much ID at Xbox stuff up on stage at Microsoft. I feel like we're at a time where there's so much indie stuff coming out. Like there's so many different ways to be indie and so many different kinds of projects to kind of try something new with that. When we were making Gone Home, it felt like we were doing something that we had seen some precedents for. We had seen Dear Esther. It wasn't like it came out of nowhere, but now there's sort of this point where we're exploring more avenues past that, right? And when we see something like Firewatch that is a first-person exploration game, but that's about this like dynamic dialogue that's happening, that takes it to a next step. And so similarly, we hope that being able to be inside these scenes and move through them and have that be part of the experience isn't just, well, it's Gone Home with this little cherry on top, but that it makes it into a legitimately new feeling experience that's still building on where we started from.
Great. So I want to give you an opportunity to plug ID at Xbox in general. We actually have to wrap up soon, but
yeah, no, I mean, Steve kind of just did it. Like there were a lot of games from ID at Xbox developers up on stage at the E3 media briefing. There's a bunch over in the Xbox booth, and it's been awesome to see just this real flowering of incredible content on Xbox One and on PC and every place from amazing independent creators. And I know, like, I'm an adventure game player from way back, and adventure game was like the one genre people said was dead. People no genre ever dies except adventure games, of course.
Right.
And I mean, and that was like the conventional wisdom for so long. And then these guys and other folks came along and turned that on its head and said, like, actually, you can do whatever kind of game you want to do, and it turns out there's a huge audience, and it's been fantastic. So I'm super excited to play Tacoma and other things.
Last year you were giving out cards to represent the ID games, and it was this thick box. So so congratulations to Microsoft on like giving so much attention to indies that you gave me like a thick box full of tiny cards. Each of which represented one indie game.
It was crazy. I think there were like 350 cards in that box.
Yeah.
It was like 2 pounds. And then this year it's on a website.
It was a good way to express the weight of indie titles.
Yeah, absolutely. So. But we have more than 1,000 games in development right now for Xbox One.
Amazing, yeah.
So
great.
It's kind of crazy.
So release date coming right up?
Yep, August
right
2nd.
around the corner?
Yep, pre-orders are open now on PC and Xbox One. You can go to tacoma.game for all those links and more info.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.